I'm going to talk about a new book that I have bought from Amazon. And this is a very, very valuable book. It's about the ancient history of the Hungarians, and it's called Gesta Hungarorum. Now, what I would like to talk about is I'd like to separate the important parts of the book. The first one lasts until the end of the Roman letters. I'm not sure if they're called letters. They're actually ending at Simon de Caesar's talkings about the introduction and the rest of it. And then comes the chronological order of the rulers and the important figures in Hungarian history. What considers the Huns and the Scythians, etc. So the first part is going to be about the introduction and the letter product of it. I'm going to tell part by part. The first thing that I noticed was that the book. So I'm not going to tell about it indirectly. I'm trying to keep it direct, as Simon talked about it. Around the 6th to the 8th century AD, Europe, the north of Europe and the east of Europe was considered to be barbarian. So this was the viewpoint of the Europeans those times. So they thought that the Hungarians and the Vikings, etc., that they used to be barbarians. And even in the 9th century, when the Huns and the Magyars fought in Augsburg, that is in Germany. So it is a very close area to Munich, and it's very close to the border to Austria. So when the Hungarians fought, or they actually were defeated in Augsburg, and when they were defeated in Augsburg, the Germans were very happy, and they rejoiced by recalling the Magyars, the Huns, that they had defeated their enemies. That's very interesting. So in a way, the Huns and the Magyars and the Huns, they were seen as the enemies in Europe, actually. That's what comes out of the thought. I mean, when you read this part, you notice that there was a certain prejudice against the Hungarians and the Magyars and the Huns. Even those times. So it's very strange because in the book it is told that when the time came to accept Christianity, and this was around 1274, this was the time when the barbarian period ended. So this means that if you accept Christianity, the barbarian viewpoint of us, or the discrimination, will have an end. Also, we can say that with the acceptance of the Christianity of the Magyars and of the Huns, there was a certain flourish. So in every area, there was a certain flourish and development and enthusiasm within 100 years. So that means that the Hungarians participated in the development of Europe after they accepted Christianity. So what a great nation. Say, not nation, but what a great folk they were. What great people they were in those times, even those times. And what noble people they were. Not only were the Hungarians seen as enemies, it was also the Normans and the Vikings. So from the north until the east. And in the book it states that the Polish people, when they accepted Christianity in the 12th century, there was a certain rumor going around, and people talked about that the only people that was left, barbarian, that was the Huns, because they hadn't been Christianized yet. And with the Huns, they meant the Tatars, actually. So the Tatars were the only people left who hadn't been Christianized. And because of this, they were barbarians, the Tatars. So with the acceptance of the Huns, the Christianity of the Huns, the world of Europe changed, of course, not only in a demographic way, but also economically, agriculturally, and there was a certain vividness going around. And with the Magyars, of course, when you consider the Magyars as the descendants of the Magyars, of course, first we can talk about the Huns. So that's their roots. Of course, they are considered Finno-Ugric from the Urals. And it's also stated in the book that they went from the steppe to the east of the east of Europe, and there they got assimilated. That's what it says in the book. And in the Urals, it was two groups that came into contact with the Magyars. These were Turkic groups and some part of Iranian groups. but mostly of them Turkic. When it comes to their myths, however, we can see that they gave impact to the Khazar Khanate, that means the Khazar Turks in Europe. And the Huns also played a role in their myths and their legends. So from time to time, the Hungarians turned back to their sagas and their myths and their legends, especially from the 10th century. Especially to the sagas that were formed from the 7th to the 9th century. It's also stated in the book that from the 5th century onwards, until the time of Christianity, the Magyars, the Huns, they rebelled against Christianity. It was not only the Magyars, but also the Avars, the Khazars, and other similar tribes that they actually revolted against the church and against Christianity. So they fought for hundreds of years, in fact, not to be Christianized because of their beliefs, because of their shamanistic and Tengriist rituals and their rooted beliefs. And this formed their personality, their identity from the 5th century onwards. So they never actually parted from their identity that they had as a Hun, as a Magyar. Actually, it is Magyar. We call it Magyar in Turkish, and I think it's also pronounced Magyar in Hungarian. So Attila, the leader of the Huns, lived in a place called Óbuda. So Óbuda was actually the Buda part of Budapest. So later, Buda became the city of Attila, the place where he lived. And the people who believed Attila, they were called Szekely. And Attila was the leader of the Huns who actually went towards West Europe, towards Germany, and this, it was 3 times. And Simon, the writer of the book, also took the route where Attila had actually conquered Western Europe. Buda actually is very close to the Turkish word budun. So budun means actually citizen, and halk in Turkish. And Buddha could be a derivation from Budun. So Buddha, Budun, could be the same root. Simon took the route in the 12th century. That's what he did, following the route that Attila had taken. And with this, Attila took the legends, the myths, and all the stories that formed the nation of Hungary to Western Europe. So that means that the German Märchen and the fairy tales and everything, the myths, that they had actually their roots in the Magyar tradition, in the Hunnic fairy tales. That's of course an anecdote that I would like to add. And I also think that the fairy tales that were formed in the Attila times, in the Hunnic era, from the era that Attila took over Western Europe 3 times, all the legends that were about the wolves, the horses, the white horses, and the fairy tales about princesses, etc., they all had their roots in Hungarian myths and legends and fairy tales, Märchen, to say in German. It's actually what the Gebrüder Grimm collected. They collected a certain series of Märchen, fairy tales, that they said to be German, but actually they have their roots in the Huns and in the Proto-Huns, in the Magyars, so-called Scythians. And there is another person, a Polish person called Katlubek. So Katlubek sounded to me very much like Turkish, a Turkic name. So Katlu could be Kutlu, and Bek could be Bey. So something like Kutlu Bey. Kutlu is something like the one who is happy, the one who is, how can I say? Oh, God. Blissed, happy, blissed, and the person, the Bey, who is blissed, the gentleman. So that Polish person was actually a Turkic person, or a Turkic descended person, most probably a Tatar, or of that kind. So we can see that. I'm sorry about the Turkish one. I'm just translating it from the Turkish version into English. So that means that we can understand that from those Polish people, there were some tribes descended from the Magyars, from the Turkic Magyars. So the grandfather of Attila was called Bela. So if you consider Bela to be a Turkish name, Bela is something like somebody who is doomed, somebody unpopular is generally called Bela. When you are always trying to cause upheaval or something like that, it's called Bela. So Attila was somebody who fought against the church. He was against the church, and so there was a certain, how can I say, was the kind of prejudice or something that the church didn't understand or the Christians didn't understand, but with the rituals that the Huns had before Christianity and the beliefs, the systems they had, they worshipped actually Tengri and Tengriism, and they had shamanistic rituals, etc., and they sang So the church actually thought, what kind of stories are these? What kind of myths and sagas do the Huns have? And they found it very strange. They made fun of it, and it was kind of odd for the church. So Attila was trying to resist against the church from the 5th century on. And so this was until the 12th century, approximately, that this resistance went on. And in the 12th century, together with the Franks, the Goths, and certain other tribes in Europe, it was thought that the Magyars, the Huns, could be integrated into the church in a way. So from in one hand, the church tried to Christianize them, but on the other hand, they were free to have their nationalistic beliefs, etc. So the traditions, the ancient traditions that the Hungarians actually had, their myths, as I said, their sagas, their fairy tales, etc., they were under a certain effect of copying. So they were actually tried to be part of the church, or let's say the church put it aside as if it was their own product. The church also, they thought that these barbaric and primitive Magyars, Huns, had to adapt to the church with their customs, with their beliefs and everything. And they insisted, the church insisted on the adaptation and the assimilation of the Hungarians. And Gesta, the book Gesta Hungarorum, emphasizes that the Huns, the ancient Huns, the Magyars, who had their roots in the Scythians, and the ancient Scythians, they had to adapt to the suppressions and the oppressions of the Catholic Church. So until the 13th century, the Huns, the Magyars, had their own myths, sagas, fairy tales, stories told, their paganistic beliefs and their shamanistic rituals, etc. And everything ended after the 13th century. And with this, it all got fused into the church. So everything actually mixed into it. So the aim of the church actually was to assimilate the Magyars into Europe, into the church, into their own caste of systems, caste of beliefs. And this they would make whatever it may cost, at any cost. That's what the church aimed. And they called the Huns and the Magyars, or the Magyars, the new barbarians. And after the assimilation into Christianity, and after the acceptance of the church. The priests said, or the officials of the church, let's say, they said that they would recreate a new citizen out of the Magyars, out of the Huns. So that means they actually put aside the original identity of them, their Scythian identity, their Hunnic identity, and they recreated a newborn citizen out of them, let's say. That's what the church aimed. And this was caused by baptism, or by baptizing them. So actually the Magyars, they were thought to be a primitive, barbaric people by the church and by the other citizens of Europe. And also, as if they were traveling in darkness, and when they saw the church and when they had the enlightenment of the church, they suddenly thrived. So that was a certain concept of the church, or that was a certain viewpoint. That's how they viewed the ancient Huns, the Magyars. And the church also says that the Magyars had a past which was doomed, and let this doomed past stay with them and never open the chapter again. So there was a certain view like this among the rest of Europe towards the Huns, towards the Magyars, with their paganistic beliefs and shamanistic rituals, etc. So even Arpad, the ruler of the Magyars, he was also Christianized like this. I think it was in the 12th century, the book said. So Simon, the writer of the book, changed all this, and he actually rescued the faith of the Magyars by trying to give them their past back, by letting them remember the past, remind them about their noble history. And with this new viewpoint, or let's say with this new open-mindedness, Simon tried to open their eyes by letting them remember and remind them how rich their history was, even though they were Christians. So they were not actually walking in darkness as it was taught, because they were taught that they were in darkness and they saw the light with Christianity. But by reminding them about their rich past that they had, and their noble identities, they were given a new, actually, identity by Simon. So how did Simon reminded them that they were a noble folk, a noble country, let's say, noble people? So the Scythians had 108 clans, let's say. And the Huns and the Magyars, they went on continuing these clans. So they had a certain blood binding, kind of blood, a kind of blood combination with them, a kind of relativeness, with these families, with these clans, with these 108 clans. So they were actually noble and pure, let's say. And Attila went until Pannonia. So Pannonia, I looked up in the map, and I'm going to post it onto my channel. It is something between Italy, Switzerland, the south of Italy, a little bit towards Yugoslavia. That part, that's Pannonia. So Attila went there and to this area. So this part, Pannonia, was considered the Scythian place of Attila. And later on, 23 chapters were formed stating about the Magyars' beliefs, traditions, etc. So it's very strange that people worried, the Magyars, the Huns worried that their purity would spoil or would be spoiled if they mixed with the local people of Germany. And let's say Pannonia was the Scythian place, and if Attila went until Köln, that was a part of Germany, and if he went up to Köln and mixed there, or let's say got assimilated, that would mean the how can I say? Yeah, that would mean the assimilation of the Hungarians, and for this reason, that they would not be pure anymore. They would not be the pure race of the Magyars as they were so proud of. So we have actually a very similar tradition in Turkish. So we call it saf. That's when you're pure. And the more you stay pure, the better you are as a character, as a person. That's a very similar belief. That's what I wanted to add. So, and the Magyars, the Huns, they had a certain belief, the Hungarians, they had a certain belief that if you were pure out of these 108 clans, family clans, you would stay pure. So until a certain period of time, the writer talks about the Hungarians, or let's say about Hungary as a pure country, let's say until a certain point of time. And after that, a certain mixture happens, a certain admixture of people. Let's say a certain assimilation of the Magyars happens, of the Hungarians takes place. And these Hungarians are considered noble and non-noble. So the ones that were pure, they were called noble, and the ones that were not pure, they were called non-noble. So the kings, they defined the Hungarians as pure Hungarians and mixed Hungarians. So Simon is trying to talk about this in his book. But even though the Hungarians had a certain admixture happening later on in their country and in their citizens, the non-pure, or the Hungarians that were not noble, or the non-noble Hungarians, they were never discriminated. I'm sorry. So they were never criticized. There was nothing in the book that states about criticism about the non-noble Hungarians. Yes, and so the only worry about the Hungarians those times was, what if Attila conquered Köln? And what if our ancestors, not our ancestors, what if our folk, our citizens, would mix with the Germans? What would happen then? So that was their only worry, the assimilation of their purity, of their own blood. And I would like to add here that there definitely was a certain admixture of the Hungarians and the Germans those times when Attila had conquered Köln, and he went until Köln, and he conquered West Europe 3 times. So that means he went until Germany 3 times. So probably maybe farther than Köln. And I would like to add here that I have a Hungarian friend, and we met up in Berlin. I grew up in Germany. And when we met in Berlin, we compared the languages, Turkish and Hungarian. And I noticed that with the vocabulary that she told me and that we compared, I noticed certain interesting facts about the vocabulary. Some vocabulary was similar to Turkish. Some vocabulary was similar to German. And some vocabulary was similar to Russian. So that makes me think. So there was a certain admixture of the groups from those periods, which was also reflected in the language. And here we also see Attila and his brother. So his brother's name is Buddha, mentioned in the book. Most probably Buddha comes from Budun, as I said, because Budun means community in Turkish. So the Hungarians had a two-folded system. So when Attila was alive, they had a certain military system in their citizens. And after Attila died, all this system changed. It most probably was fused up and fused into another kind of community. So actually this was their way of life. The Hungarians lived a kind of military way of life, based on the military system, based on military, etc., and on cavalry, etc. But after Attila's death, it all changed. The structure of the people changed. The union of the Hungarians changed in a way. So Buddha, his son, turned back from Germany, and I think he went back to the Scythian land, the Pannonia, and he wanted to get revenge from the Germans. So it's very strange that the son of Attila turned back to Pannonia. And here it talks about a certain family member that was actually Greek, who was not Hungarian. And within the community, there was a kind of gossip that he, the son, was not a pure Magyar, he was not a pure Hungarian, and he was a mixed Hungarian. And they criticized him because he had married someone from far away, from outside the family. That's what they criticized the people who didn't marry from within, but from outside the clan. So that was also something that we also have among Turks. So of course you don't marry relatives, but if you marry someone from the clan or someone from the city, someone who is Hungarian or someone who is Turk, you would be pure. But if you marry someone who is Bulgarian, someone who is German or someone who is Greek or African descendant, etc., you would be not pure anymore as a Turk or as a Hungarian. So that's the same view, actually. It's the same point of view, the same mind. So I see how similar that all is. And you see the kinship, you see the close relatedness of the Magyars and of the Turks. And I think it's most probably because of the common ancestor, which is the Scythians. So actually, when you're talking about the purity of the Hungarians, it is actually their nobility. So Hungarians are noble people if they stay pure, and even if they have a mixed nationality. So it's very strange that in the book, Attila, his son Saba, is considered pure, but the other leaders of the tribe, the other leaders of the Hungarians, they are not considered so. So that's very strange as well. So we actually have the same mindset. That's what makes me actually happy. Yes, and the people who were of non-pure blood, they were considered normal citizens. They were not considered noble or privileged ones. So also, the Hungarians, they are called pure when they stay pure in the clan. That means they are called actually Aryans. And Aryans are the people who haven't mixed. Now, Aryans is something like arı ırk in Turkish. So arı ırk means the pure race in Turkish. So you see the similarity between pure and ar. The word stem where Aryan comes from, it comes from Turkish. There is another person called Master Akos. Now, Master Akos described, or he was known as someone who described the Scythians, the pure Scythians, not the poor Scythians, the pure Scythians, and what characteristics they had. So the Scythians, the pure Scythians, were considered noble people. So this means the Scythians were pure, the Scythians were noble. Especially in the 12th and 13th century, this person, this historian, described the Hungarians as ancient Scythians who were pure, who had noble blood. So Simon actually considers the mixture of the blood, or the mixture of the assimilation of the Huns, something negative. He sees it as something loss, say, something that you lose. So there's also something mentioned in the book where Stefan leads the Hungarians from darkness to light, from sorrow to happiness, and from dependence into independence. So we can summarize then some historians and some Europeans, especially the people in the church, they saw Hungarians with the acceptance of Christianity as if they were going from darkness into light, as if they were suppressed and oppressed and went into freedom, from sorrow into bliss and endless happiness, and from ignorance into knowledge and wisdom, and as if they were given equality by choosing Christianity. So it was considered that the church gave them the golden liberty. So very interesting thing. I'd like to give you a certain fact now about the theory that existed in the Magyar history and in the Magyar texts. The number 7, yes, the number 7. So this number 7 was about the 7 Magyars that existed. This was about the 11th century. So the 7 Magyars that existed. Most probably the 7 tribes of Magyars. I know from Turkish tribes that went into Eastern Europe and formed the tribes of Hungary. And one Turkish historian, told me that out of 9 tribes, the Hungarians, the Magyars, had 7 tribes who were Turkic. So I think that this is mentioned here when you talk about the 7 Magyars. And another thing that I noticed was certain vocabulary, certain words that were taken from ancient Hungarian were translated into Latin. And very close words from Latin were actually descending from Hungarian. And this also entered the language of Italy. That means Italian was affected by it, but Moreover, Latin was affected by it too. So first Latin, then Italian. So actually, the Christians thought that the Hungarians were given equality, nobility, etc. But in fact, they never forgot that the Hungarians had come from the Scythian land, from Pannonia. That's what they never forgot, the Church and the other Europeans. And even in the Bible, there is a part which is about Scythians. So the Church was very affected by it, and they put it into the Bible. So the next part of the book talks about the inequalities and the punishment of the Hungarians and how it all functioned. And towards the end of this part, the French and the Hungarians are compared. And of course, those times in the 12th, 13th century and before that, you see that the decisions of the French are given by the king, and in Hungarians and with the Hungarians, or in the Hungarian custom, it is the Hungarians who decide upon the king. So they chose the king. They chose who was their leader. This is actually called kurultai in Turkish, and I think it is the common root in Hungarian as well. They call it also kurultai, which is actually a community that decides upon you, that can vote upon you and decide upon you. So actually this kind of kurultai, which is celebrated every year by the Hungarians, actually is the belief system which has its roots in this Scythian tradition, in this Hunnic tradition, and in this Hungarian Turkic tradition. So when we come to the punishment part, it describes and it compares the punishment of the Europeans part by part, those times, considering Charlemagne, etc. And when it comes to the Hungarians, the punishment is given like this. When we compare the Hungarians and their military strategies with the other Charlemagne and Roman military power, you see that there is a strong effect of military basement within the system. So the nobility and the fighting soul of the Hungarians goes back to its military system, and that distinguishes the Hungarians from the other, let's say, from the other European systems, from the Romans, from the French, and from Charlemagne, and from the other systems of Europe. And these military people were noble. They were considered noble by the Hungarians. And the people who were in military power, who had a certain impact on the military, they were considered noble. So ethics was important in Hungarians. Loyalty was important. And of course, this all played a role in their military system, which made them noble. And of course, moral plays a very important role here. So I'm going to summarize it until the deeds of Hungarians. This will be the first part, and the second part will start with the deeds of the Hungarians. So Simon talks about communitas in the gesta hungarorum, and the number 6 is important here. So the Hungarians had their legends, they had their beliefs. It is said it is something like a religious belief in their myths, in their stories that are told from person to person, that they consisted of mother and father, of mom and dad, of nobles, and of kings. So in this Scythian world, in Pannonia, they selected their leaders. So among their groups, they had nobles, they also had barons. So, and in certain periods of time, the nobles, they formed together groups with whom they rebelled, or let's say they disputed against the church. So in summary, we can say then that the Hungarians, they had a certain form of military union. They had nobility. They were Aryans and non-Aryans, considered Scythians and half-Scythians, or Huns, Magyars, and mixed Magyars, but they were never excluded from the community and they were never discriminated. So I mentioned the number 6. So in their history of the Magyars, of the Hungarians, there used to be 6 rulers, 6 kings. One of them was Attila. After the death of Attila, the certain military union actually was didn't stay firm, and it actually replaced the communitas. But it was not a kind of firm relationship that you had with the leader or with the king. You were able to express yourself and tell your opinion to the leader, to the king. So freedom of speech existed in the 13th century and at those times. Thomas Aquinas talks about the Hungarians, that they had a certain system within the community that was able to choose the king, and there was a certain freedom of speech that they had when they had a kind of election or something like that. So it actually was a kind of monarchy, but not the monarchy that we know of. It was a kind of monarchy that the community decided upon their leader. So the Hungarians had a kind of self-reigning system, in a way, that chose their own king. So in short, we can say that the Hungarian system was very much based on the military and the fighting system and their defense system. According to Aquinas, there is a certain authority in the system and a certain aristocracy. So with this system, with this political, no, it was not political, with this military power, they created a certain self-reigning power. So in short, we can say that the Hungarians, they had a certain national unity, military unity, and this all affected the Christians who lived in Europe. So they learned lots of things from the Magyars, from the Hungarians. Yes. So as a summary, we can say that this was the kind of system that the Hungarians had. And in part 2, we will continue with the deeds of the Hungarians. Thank you for listening.